As we continue our series on the 1982 World's Fair, today we're going to take a trip back and look at two arcade classics on two classic machines right here on Vintage Geek. Just a quick reminder, if you like what you see today, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps us a lot as we grow, and one of the things that helps us out the most is if you would consider becoming a Vintage Geek member. You can do that at the website, and for just under $20 a year, you get access to all of our content commercial-free, plus some extra goodies and more. It's all at vintagegeek.com. We've been covering the 1982 World's Fair here on Vintage Geek for the last couple of videos. And the reason we're doing that is that we're actually building a brand new exhibit for the Vintage Geek Museum here in 2025 that showcases things that were at the 1982 World's Fair, which was held right here in Knoxville, Tennessee, which of course is where the Vintage Geek Museum is based. There was a lot of technology that was shown at the fair. There was a lot of fun and a lot of games for sure. Today I want to talk about the video games that were at the Video Arcade at the 1982 World's Fair. That arcade was put on by a company called Video Expo Inc., and they were hired out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to come set up at the fair. They actually had 500 different arcade machines, as I've read, and they also had a section called Robot Raiders, which was basically a section where you would have robots that people could control, up to 8 people at a time actually, and they would have some kind of lasers that would fire at each other. I have to imagine the concept of this was to be an early version of what we would know as battle bots or something like that. But as I've read, they did have a lot of technical issues with those robots, and someone that worked at the exhibit actually said that they had to get involved and try to come up with fixes for these robots to make them work during the course of the fair. But we're not going to be talking about the robot section of the Video Arcade today. We're going to be talking about the classic games, because Video Expo actually had 7 coins minted specifically for the event. These were to be used as the arcade tokens. Each one of these tokens contained artwork of the various key arcade games that were at the exhibit. And these were major titles at the time. We have things like Donkey Kong, Pacman, Space Invaders. All of them were present on these great game tokens. We're going to be covering these specific games here on the channel. But you might be asking the question, aren't you a vintage computer museum and not an arcade museum? And the answer is, you are correct. We are very focused on vintage computers, so we're taking a little bit of a different take on this. What we're going to be doing is showcasing each of these 7 featured games on an original home computer. Now granted, the years of these ports may not match the 1982 timestamp of the actual World's Fair, but they should be close, and we hope they'll be a very good representation of the games that were featured at the fair and a chance for people to play those games on these vintage machines. So I'm pretty excited about putting this together, and today we're going to cover 2 of those titles and 2 of the vintage machines. The first one we're going to try today is a game called Scramble, and we're going to be playing this on the Tomy Tutor, which was a machine that we featured in an earlier video of Vintage Geek. So let's get into it. I've actually been impressed with the Tomy Tutor overall as an early personal computer, and I'm excited to see what the game Scramble is like on this system. Now, of course, this was one of the featured games at the 1982 World's Fair, as we've discussed, and this should be a pretty good port of it. Now, nothing's like the arcade original, of course, and this particular game didn't get nearly as many ports out there as some of the others we're going to be looking at. So it should be interesting to give this a playthrough. We've got our initial menu, which gives us graphic mode, basic mode, or cartridge. So let's go down to cartridge. All right. Now, player 1 or 2. All right, so 1. I think we want amateur. It's all coming back to me now. I believe that when I played this game in our original video, I was not very good at it, so I'm hoping that maybe I can get a little bit more experience today. I am using the original Tomy Tutor controllers, and these are not my favorite controller devices out there, but they do work. The reason that Scramble is important is because it was actually the first side-scrolling shooter with forced scrolling and multiple distinct levels. And actually, this game kind of established the whole genre for games to come. It sold 15,136 arcade cabinets within 5 months. Now, while we're playing this on the Tomy Tutor today, one of the other popular releases for this game was the Vectrex, which actually had vector graphics. I'm going to have to get out the Vectrex and see what the port for that looks like as well. And actually, visually, it looks pretty good as well. Again, nothing like the arcade original. They also had some unauthorized clones of this game that came out for the Commodore 64 and the VIC-20. Those were not official versions of it, but I'm sure that they're probably good games as well. There was one for the BBC Micro that was called Rocket Raid. There was also a sequel to this game later on, which was actually more difficult. It was called Super Cobra, and it was released later in the year. Apparently there was also a dedicated handheld version of this made by Tomy, which I think was a spin-off of Tomy, which kind of makes sense. It's always great when you can get two in one shot. Originally, Scramble had a lot of positive praise in the industry. The February 1982 issue of Computer and Video Games said it was the first arcade game to send you on a mission and quickly earned a big following. It's interesting to note that the original sales of the arcade cabinets in the US would be worth $20 million, which is equivalent to $67 million in today's money. Oh, the ground just changed colors. What does that mean? Oh no. They're all coming at me now. Ah! It's a pretty intense game, and it really picks up as you get through the level. Got to 4200, which is not terrible, but I do like how this game plays on the Tomy Tutor. It looks really good, the colors look good, the graphics look great, and the movement is fun. I'm really glad we have a copy of Scramble in the library and that people will get a chance to play this on the Tomy Tutor. It is kind of one of the more obscure machines we have in the museum, and it's a fun game to play on it for sure. Next up, we're going to take a look at a classic. Everyone knows the game Pac-Man, of course, and its follow-up, Ms. Pac-Man, and we are looking at the follow-up today. Now, I want to mention at this point that Pac-Man was a huge part of the 1982 World's Fair. In fact, Video Expo Inc., the company out of Pittsburgh that set up the arcade, actually had 4 pop-up stores around the World's Fair grounds that were all dedicated to selling Pac-Man merchandise. And that sounds kind of common now. You would expect this for certain pop cultural things, maybe going to a special store in the mall. But back in 1982, that was pretty novel, especially to have 4 different stores focused on it. They had everything you could possibly imagine that was Pac-Man themed, and they even had a Pac-Man walking around the fairgrounds, sneaking up behind people like the person that wrote the article that I read about this particular event. But today we're going to take a look at the follow-up to Pac-Man, which is of course Ms. Pac-Man, and this game corrected some of the problems with the original title. One of those being that now you had true randomization in the patterns, so you wouldn't just be able to go in and kind of figure out the pattern, memorize it, and then become good at the game. It would change theoretically every time you would play it. And that really made Ms. Pac-Man arguably a better game. Now, of course, like Pac-Man, its predecessor, the Ms. Pac-Man game got a number of ports on a variety of different computer systems at the time, and it was a little bit difficult deciding which system to feature for this, but I really wanted to bring in the TI99 4A, because I actually really like this system. For one, it's one of those systems that had a lot of sales and doesn't get talked about quite as much today, and I think that it has a pretty respectable port of the Ms. Pac-Man game. I want to try Ms. Pac-Man for the TI99 4A today and see just how good it is. So I've got Ms. Pac-Man ready to play here, and I have to say I really love the way that Texas Instruments looks. Their opening screen looks great, and especially on this original TI monitor, everything is crisp and clear. And this is, I think, becoming one of my favorite early vintage computer systems, just in its simplicity and the way everything is put together. So let's see what Ms. Pac-Man looks like here. I'm going to press any key to begin. And of course we're going to go into Ms. Pac-Man. Now this port actually is from Atari Soft. It's not one of the generic clones, and it's also not a look-alike like we looked at for the Odyssey 2 in our previous video. I'm going to go ahead and play this in single-player mode. I'm also going to be using the keyboard today. I do not have a great set of TI99 joysticks, and I'm going to just try this using the keyboard mode because of that. Of course, we're going to do a one-player game. It looks like you can change the level here as well, but we'll start with level 1. The movement keys are on E, S, D, and X. But I guess for the other player, you could use the right-hand side of the keyboard. Love the classic Pac-Man sounds. All right. I mean, it looks pretty good. Still trying to get used to the keyboard functionality a little bit here. Originally, Ms. Pacman was an unlicensed clone, actually. It was called Crazy Auto, eventually cleared and released legally through Namco and Midway due to prior legal action from Atari, which made it the first of several American Pac-Man games by Midway. It's worth noting here that Atari actually sued due to another conversion kit, Super Missile Attack, but settled with the stipulation that they report any conversion kits to the original manufacturer before releasing them. Then almost immediately afterward hired GCC to make games for them, including the classic Food Fight and the Atari 7800. Once you get used to this cluster of keys on the keyboard, it's not too bad. I don't know what it would be like with the joystick to play, but ultimately it looks pretty good. I think it's a little slower than the arcade version, but graphically it looks good. Uh-oh, I'm getting close. Oops. Ms. Pacman was, of course, the first game that was deliberately targeted at women. Somebody had the smart idea that over 50% of the potential audience were female, and having a game that would appeal to that would be very lucrative, potentially. One thing I didn't know about Ms. Pacman is that it actually wasn't even released in Japan until the Atari Lynx version came out in 1990. So it would have been very unheard of in Japan up until that time. Sometimes the up key doesn't respond as fast as I would like it to. Or I'm just not quite in the right spot. Ah. Yes! I'm in a new map. I'm feeling pretty good about things. The reason people might remember the game Crazy Auto, which this was based on, is because a Time magazine reporter that was doing a report on video games mistakenly took a photo of Crazy Auto, which was on a brief test in one arcade before being changed to Ms. Pacman, which of course immortalized it forever. Even though we're playing Ms. Pacman on the TI99 today, in the arcade version it was actually still technically an add-on board. If you open up a classic Ms. Pacman machine, you'll find a Pac-Man board with a data card, and when it boots, it actually starts launching Pac-Man before hitting the data for Ms. Pacman and jumping to it. And if the data card is removed, the regular version of Pac-Man will play. Ms. Pacman, still a classic game. It's looking great on the TI99. I like the different levels of difficulty they have here. Overall, I think it's a pretty good experience for playing Ms. Pacman. It's certainly not playing it on the original arcade cabinet, but I think it's a good way of demonstrating the power of the TI99 4A, as well as playing a classic arcade game that was featured at the 1982 World's Fair. Ms. Pacman is truly still a classic today, and I'm really glad that we have this TI99 version for the exhibit on the 1982 World's Fair. We will keep you posted as we make more progress on this exhibit and get things built, and ultimately we'll let you know when you can come visit. We're excited to be able to give people the opportunity to play these classic arcade games, and we're hoping to even have some recreations of the original tokens made that you can have as a collectible souvenir if you come to visit. Once again, if you've enjoyed this video today, please consider liking and subscribing. It does help us out a lot, and one of the things that helps us out the most is if you would consider becoming a Vintage Geek member. You can do that at the website, and for just under $20 a year, you get access to all of our content commercial-free. We have some bonus code snippets and some extras that you can check out, and we even have some cool merch that you can buy for your friends and family. It's all at vintagegeek.com. Until next time, I'm Aaron, and this has been Vintage Geek.